Imagine a king who had it all: wisdom beyond human comprehension, wealth that dazzled the world, and power that shaped nations. This is Solomon, son of the famous King David, a man who began his journey with a divine promise and a surprising request, not for wealth or victory, but for wisdom to govern his people with justice. And God not only granted this request, but also showered him with rare blessings, making Solomon the wisest and most prosperous man of his time. Under his leadership, Israel enjoyed an unprecedented golden age. He expanded his kingdom, built the magnificent Temple of Jerusalem, one of the greatest symbols of faith ever, and drew the attention of leaders and rulers from distant lands, such as the Queen of Sheba, who crossed deserts just to hear his wisdom. Solomon's influence was so vast that his name resonated through ancient kingdoms as a synonym of power and divine intelligence. Yet, behind this glorious reign lies a disturbing enigma. How could someone so favored, a man gifted with extraordinary talents and divine favor, end up lost in spiritual ruin? At what point did the wisest king in history stray from his mission and get entangled in temptations he seemed to understand better than anyone? In this journey through the life and fall of Solomon, we will explore how power and influence can become traps, even for the wisest, and learn valuable lessons for our own lives. If you think success, wealth, and wisdom are enough to guarantee a fulfilled life, get ready for a story that may challenge all your beliefs. Together, let's uncover the secret of what truly leads to genuine fulfillment, and how even the greatest can fall. Before we dive deeper into Solomon's story and the impact of his choices, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the channel. Here we explore some of the Bible's most fascinating and profound stories that not only reveal the past, but also bring transformative lessons for the present. If you want to understand what led history's greatest leaders to reach the heights, and in some cases, the downfall, and learn from these examples to strengthen your own journey, this is the right place. Your subscription allows us to continue bringing content that goes beyond common narratives and reveals what these stories truly mean for our lives and spiritual growth. So, subscribe now, and let's discover how ancient lessons can transform our daily lives. The request for wisdom. Solomon's request for wisdom is one of the most remarkable and instructive moments of his life. When God appeared to Solomon in a dream and offered him the opportunity to ask for anything he wanted, Solomon made a request that would surprise anyone. He didn't ask for wealth, power, or long life. He asked for wisdom to govern the people of Israel with justice and discernment. In 1 Kings chapter 3:9, we see Solomon's sincerity. He sought the ability to distinguish between good and evil, to lead the people with equity. This request deeply pleased God, who recognized the humility and nobility behind Solomon's words. In response, God not only granted Solomon unparalleled wisdom, but also gave him wealth and honor, promising that he would be the wisest and most prosperous king of his time, as we read in 1 Kings chapter 3:10-14. This was an example of the divine principle that those who first seek God's kingdom and righteousness end up receiving abundant blessings beyond that. Soon after receiving this extraordinary wisdom, Solomon faced a situation that would test his new gift of judgment. In a famous story, two women came to him disputing the motherhood of a baby. Both claimed to be the mother, and there were no witnesses or evidence to resolve the conflict. Solomon then proposed to divide the baby in half, offering each woman a part. His seemingly drastic decision was actually a strategy to reveal the true mother's heart. The true mother begged the king to spare the child's life and give him to the other woman, demonstrating her unconditional love. This judgment, recorded in 1 Kings 3:16-28, showcased the depth of Solomon's wisdom and how he uniquely applied justice effectively. This moment not only demonstrated his wisdom, but also solidified his reputation among all the people of Israel. They saw that he was not just a king with power, but someone with divine discernment to lead them. Solomon's request for wisdom is a powerful example of how prioritizing the collective good and justice can open doors to unexpected blessings. Expansion of fame and wealth. Solomon's fame and wealth were not confined within Israel's borders. On the contrary, his wisdom and prosperity quickly made him known worldwide. Solomon was not just a wise king, but also a skilled strategist and diplomat, which helped to expand the influence of his kingdom. He formed alliances with various nations and established trade routes that brought abundant wealth to Israel. His palace overflowed with treasures, gold, and gifts from leaders who wanted to recognize his greatness and secure favorable relations with his government. Among the distinguished visitors who sought to witness Solomon's wisdom firsthand, the Queen of Sheba stands out. She traveled a great distance, bringing valuable gifts like gold, spices, and precious stones to test the king's wisdom. In 1 Kings chapter 10, 6-7, we read that after hearing Solomon answer her complex questions, she was astounded. The Queen of Sheba declared that what she had heard about him in her own land was not even half of what he truly was. Solomon had exceeded all expectations, both in his wisdom and in his wealth. This visit not only reinforced Solomon's reputation as the wisest man, but also as someone blessed by God with prosperity and influence. One of the greatest testimonies to Solomon's wealth and power was the construction of the Temple of Jerusalem, a grand project that became a symbol of worship and devotion to God. In 1 Kings chapters 6 and 8, we see details of the temple's construction and dedication, built with the finest materials, cedar wood, gold, and precious stones. The temple was more than just a physical building. It represented God's presence among his people. Solomon dedicated the temple with a heartfelt prayer, asking God to listen to the prayers of the Israelites and protect them, especially when they repented and returned to him. The temple's construction was Solomon's greatest accomplishment, a monument to his faith and leadership. Thus, Solomon was known not only for his wisdom or power. He built a legacy that would forever mark Israel's history. But, as we will see, the grandeur of his achievements also brought challenges and temptations that gradually led his heart away from his original purpose. Israel's prominence under Solomon's rule. During Solomon's reign, Israel enjoyed an era of prestige and stability like never before. With the extraordinary wisdom and wealth that Solomon possessed, he transformed Israel into one of the most prosperous and respected nations in the ancient world. Under his rule, Israel transitioned from an isolated kingdom into a hub of trade, culture, and international influence. Solomon was a visionary when it came to commercial and diplomatic strategies. He established advantageous agreements with neighboring kingdoms, creating trade routes that brought abundant resources and luxury goods to Israel. In 1 Kings 10:22, we learn that he had a fleet of ships that every 3 years returned with exotic goods from distant lands, bringing gold, silver, ivory, monkeys, and peacocks. This international trade brought not only material wealth to Israel, but also a diversity of culture and ideas, broadening the kingdom's reach and sophistication. The trade routes Solomon established included significant alliances with Egypt, Lebanon, and other regional powers. With Lebanon, he secured a treaty for the supply of cedar wood, essential for the temple's construction and his own palace. He also established trade routes, passing through strategic points in the Middle East, controlling the flow of precious goods, and ensuring that Israel remained economically stable and politically influential. The opulence of Solomon's palace and throne. The wealth Solomon accumulated throughout his reign was visible not only in his trade practices, but also in the opulence of his own residence. His palace was a monumental construction designed to reflect Israel's power and prosperity. Inside the palace, Solomon ordered the construction of an ivory throne overlaid with pure gold, a powerful symbol of his authority. This throne, detailed in the Bible, had 6 steps and was adorned with sculptures of lions on each side of the armrests. This grandeur symbolized not only Solomon's prosperous reign, but also God's presence and blessing upon Israel. The lavishness of the palace and the splendor of Solomon's court demonstrated to the world that Israel, once a nation of shepherds and farmers, had become one of the most powerful and influential kingdoms of its time. Visitors and emissaries from other kingdoms were impressed by the level of organization, wealth, and wisdom that governed the realm. Solomon was not just a powerful ruler, but also a generous host who impressed everyone with the abundance and order of his royal house. Israel's prominence in the international arena. The impact of Solomon's reign extended far beyond Israel's borders. He established Israel as a respected and influential nation, whose power was based not only on its wealth, but also on the wisdom and justice of its king. This period of prosperity brought internal stability to the kingdom and made Israel a model of peace and success for other nations. The people of Israel thrived under Solomon's rule, living in safety and enjoying a comfortable life, while the kingdom's borders were protected by strong alliances and the respect other kingdoms held for Solomon's power. Solomon used Israel's wealth and stability to fund projects that benefited the kingdom as a whole, including infrastructure, city building, and the maintenance of a strong, well-equipped army. This further solidified Israel's position as a regional power that possessed not only military strength, but also a vibrant economy and a culture that attracted intellectuals, artists, and traders from various parts of the world. Reflection on Solomon's reign. While Israel reached its peak under Solomon's rule, with abundant peace and prosperity, moral and spiritual challenges began to arise alongside the wealth and the influence of foreign cultures. The opulence of Solomon's palace and throne was impressive, but also served as a reminder of the potential traps that can arise from excessive prosperity. Solomon's reign illustrates that even during a golden age, it is necessary to maintain spiritual vigilance and prudence so that material success does not lead to moral decline. Solomon's spiritual downfall. Solomon's life was marked by a brilliant beginning, but also a tragic spiritual downfall that marred his legacy. Despite his extraordinary wisdom and a life filled with achievements, Solomon eventually succumbed to the temptations of power and influence that surrounded him during his reign. He began to drift away from God by engaging in political alliances and marriages with foreign women, contrary to the divine guidance that God had given the people of Israel. To strengthen his power and ensure peace with neighboring nations, Solomon married multiple women from foreign kingdoms, forming political alliances through these marriages. In 1 Kings 11, 1-2, we read that he married women from various nations, including Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. While this strategy brought temporary political benefits, it also introduced a significant spiritual risk. God had instructed Israel not to intermarry with other nations to prevent the religious influence of those peoples from leading the Israelites into idolatry. However, Solomon ignored this warning and accumulated hundreds of foreign wives and concubines, each with their own culture and religious practices. The influence of foreign women. As Solomon grew older, the influence of his foreign wives began to affect his heart. They persuaded him to participate in their worship and to honor foreign gods, weakening his commitment to the God of Israel. In 1 Kings chapter 11, 3-4, we see that Solomon was led to worship pagan gods, and his heart was no longer fully devoted to God, as was the heart of his father David. This gradual shift distanced him from the spiritual purity that had once guided him, leading him to a state of confusion and divided loyalties. Solomon's deviation serves as a warning about the power of negative influences, especially when we allow our values and convictions to be compromised by external pressure. Solomon, the wisest man of his time, allowed the religious practices of his wives to erode his fidelity to God, and this spiritual neglect profoundly impacted his life and Israel's future. Building altars for foreign gods. Solomon's deviation was not limited to passive worship of his wives' gods. In an act that represented his submission to idolatry, Solomon built altars for foreign deities such as Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh, the god of the Moabites, and Molech, the god of the Ammonites, as mentioned in 1 Kings 11:5, chapter 8. These altars were erected on high and public places, visible to all the people of Israel, marking a tragic reversal of values for a king who had once dedicated the temple to God. Each of these foreign gods represented practices that went against the principles of God and the values of Israel. For instance, the worship of Molech included human sacrifices, something abominable in God's eyes, distancing Israel from its identity as God's chosen people. By building these altars, Solomon led the people of Israel to witness, and in some cases participate in, rituals contrary to the faith in the one true God of Israel. These acts seriously compromised the kingdom's sanctity and allowed idolatry to spread among the Israelites. Consequences of Solomon's spiritual downfall. Solomon's spiritual downfall did not go without consequence. In response to this idolatry, God was deeply disappointed with Solomon and warned that the kingdom would be divided as punishment. In 1 Kings chapter 11:11-13, God told Solomon that, because of his sin, the kingdom would be taken from his family, though out of love for David, this would happen only after Solomon's death, leaving one tribe for his son. Solomon's story is a powerful testimony to the dangers of spiritual complacency and negative influences. His downfall teaches us that even those who receive extraordinary gifts from God can stray if they are not vigilant in maintaining faith and fidelity to God. Solomon, who began his reign with humility and devotion, ended with a divided heart and a weakened nation. His example serves as a reminder that true wisdom does not lie merely in acquiring knowledge, but in remaining faithful to what is right, even amid temptations and external pressures. God's warnings and consequences. Solomon's relationship with God began on a profound and intimate note, filled with blessings and divine promises that strengthened Israel and Solomon's life. Yet over time, Solomon drifted from his loyalty to the God of Israel, allowing his spiritual life to be corrupted by idolatry and foreign influence. God, observing Solomon's moral and spiritual decline, did not remain silent. He issued clear warnings and highlighted the consequences of his disobedience, providing a final chance for repentance before ruin. God's warnings to Solomon. Early in his reign, God had warned Solomon about the importance of faithfulness. In 1 Kings chapter 9:6-7, God told Solomon that if he and his descendants turned away, worshiping other gods and abandoning his commandments, Israel would suffer severe consequences. God declared that the temple, built and dedicated with such zeal by Solomon, would be rejected, and Israel would become a symbol of shame among the nations. This warning served as a clear reminder that God's blessing upon Israel was contingent upon the faithfulness and obedience of its leader and its people. Despite this direct warning, Solomon strayed, compromising his loyalty to God by adopting idolatrous practices. God then spoke to Solomon again, emphasizing that his disobedience would bring serious repercussions for him and his kingdom. This warning was an opportunity for Solomon to reflect on his actions and correct his path, but he chose to ignore it. The prophecy of the kingdom's division. Solomon's idolatry set in motion a divine judgment that would alter Israel's history. In 1 Kings 11:11, God declared that, due to Solomon's infidelity, the kingdom would be torn from his hands. This prophecy was not merely a condemnation of Solomon, it signified a rupture in the united kingdom that David and Solomon had built and expanded. Israel, once a prosperous and unified kingdom, was now destined for division because of its king's lack of faithfulness. God's pronouncement to Solomon was more than just a prediction, it was the inevitable result of his spiritual missteps. Solomon, who had started as a pious and wise leader, would end his reign leaving a legacy of division and hardship for his descendants. The division of the kingdom was not only a punishment for Solomon, but also a message to the people of Israel about the weight of idolatry and disloyalty. God's promise for the kingdom's continuation was tied to obedience, and by breaking that covenant, Solomon brought judgment upon his lineage and the nation. God's mercy through the covenant with David. Despite the severity of the judgment, God showed mercy out of love for David, Solomon's father. In 1 Kings 11:12-13, God stated that the kingdom's division would not occur during Solomon's lifetime, but in that of his son. This act of mercy reflected the covenant God had made with David, promising that his lineage would remain on Israel's throne. Although Solomon strayed from God, David's faithfulness still had an impact on the nation's future. God decided that the kingdom would be divided, but that one tribe would remain with David's line. This decision was not only about justice, but also about honoring the promise made to the man after God's own heart, David. This act shows that, even amid disobedience, God honors his promises and is merciful, even though the consequences of mistakes must still be faced. Thus, God chose to leave an inheritance for Solomon's son, ensuring that while the kingdom would be divided, David's lineage would not be extinguished. Consequences of Solomon's spiritual downfall. The prophecy of the kingdom's division was fulfilled after Solomon's death, when his son Rehoboam ascended the throne. The people, already burdened by the economic demands and taxes imposed by Solomon's reign, rebelled, leading to the split of the kingdom into two parts, the northern kingdom, known as Israel, and the southern kingdom called Judah. Israel would never again be united, as it had been under David and the early reign of Solomon. This division led to internal conflicts and weakened both kingdoms, making them vulnerable to invasions and conflicts with neighboring nations. The divided kingdom was the beginning of an era marked by political instability, civil wars, and, most importantly, a continuous departure from God, as many subsequent kings, particularly in the northern kingdom, adopted idolatrous practices and neglected God's laws. Solomon's spiritual downfall affected not only him and his family, but also the people of Israel, whose future generations bore the impact of his choices. Reflection on God's warnings and consequences. God's warnings to Solomon reveal the seriousness with which God regards faithfulness and obedience. Although Solomon had received wisdom, wealth, and power, he neglected the most important aspect of his relationship with God, sincere and exclusive devotion. His story reminds us that gifts and blessings without faithfulness are vulnerable to ruin. God was patient and merciful with Solomon, offering opportunities for him to repent and change his path, but by ignoring these warnings, Solomon sealed the fate of his kingdom. God's mercy toward David, despite Solomon's fall, also highlights that God's love is steadfast and that he honors his covenants. However, the consequences of Solomon's choices teach us that obedience to God is essential for keeping his blessings upon our lives. Even though God is merciful, our decisions have a profound impact, not only on us, but also on those who come after us. 7. Solomon's reflections in Ecclesiastes. The book of Ecclesiastes offers a deep look into Solomon's final reflections as a man who had experienced the fullness of achievements, pleasures, and power. As he grew older, Solomon began to realize that all the wealth and experiences he had accumulated could not fill the emptiness that his departure from God had left in his heart. In Ecclesiastes, he shares his discoveries about the meaning of life, the purpose of existence, and the emptiness of purely earthly pursuits. All is vanity. Solomon's lament on his achievements. At the beginning of Ecclesiastes, Solomon expresses a powerful statement that resonates like a lament. All is vanity. Ecclesiastes chapter 1:2. This phrase summarizes his frustration upon realizing that all his material achievements, earthly wisdom, and the pleasure he had sought throughout life were ultimately fleeting and empty. The term vanity here represents the transience, like a breath or mist that quickly fades. Solomon, acclaimed as the wisest and most prosperous man of his era, concludes that everything he achieved and accumulated held no lasting value. Solomon's reflection on the emptiness of accomplishments is a reminder that the pursuit of external achievements and wealth, while it may bring momentary satisfaction, is insufficient to satisfy the spiritual longing of the human heart. Even for someone who had everything, like Solomon, possessions and achievements did not bring lasting meaning, for without a deep connection with God, everything seemed superficial. The search for pleasure and the insignificance of life without God. In Ecclesiastes chapter 2:10-11, Solomon describes how he dedicated his life to seeking pleasure and satisfaction in everything the world could offer. He experienced the finest feasts, built gardens and palaces, accumulated wealth, surrounded himself with music, servants, and everything that could bring him pleasure. However, after indulging in all these luxuries, he realized that none of them brought inner peace or lasting contentment. Solomon declares, "I looked on all the works that my hands had done, and on the labor in which I had toiled, and indeed all was vanity and grasping for the wind. There was no profit under the sun." This reflection reveals Solomon's understanding that, despite his pursuit of pleasure and meaning in earthly things, they did not satisfy the spiritual need he felt. The expression, grasping for the wind, encapsulates Solomon's frustration in discovering that all his efforts to find meaning in pleasure and wealth were like trying to capture the wind, an exercise in futility without lasting results. He concluded that without God, even the greatest human joys and accomplishments are temporary and insignificant. Therefore, Solomon realized that the quest for satisfaction outside of God is a trap. Although he lived life fully and possessed everything the world could offer, he felt the emptiness of a life disconnected from the Creator. His words in Ecclesiastes are a testimony from someone who reached the height of human experience only to find that, in the end, none of it held true value. The conclusion of Solomon's life, obeying God as the true purpose. Toward the end of Ecclesiastes, Solomon arrives at a conclusion that defines the true purpose of life. In Ecclesiastes 12:13 he says, "Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is man's all." This statement is the culmination of Solomon's journey in search of meaning, a conclusion born from the wisdom he gained through both his achievements and his failures. After experiencing all that the world has to offer, Solomon understood that the true purpose of life does not lie in pursuing riches, pleasures, or personal accomplishments, but rather in obedience and a relationship with God. Fear God and keep his commandments is a call to put God first and recognize that he is the source of meaning and purpose. For Solomon, this conclusion was not theoretical, but the result of a life filled with highs and lows. He experienced both the blessings and consequences of straying from God and realized that, in the end, only obedience to God could bring true and lasting satisfaction. Reflection on the lessons of Ecclesiastes. Solomon's reflections in Ecclesiastes provide a powerful message for all of us. He shows that life without God is empty and meaningless. His words remind us that success, pleasure, and earthly achievements may bring moments of satisfaction, but are only temporary and hold no eternal value. The pursuit of purpose in earthly things is like chasing after the wind, a pursuit with no destination. Solomon warns us that true happiness and fulfillment are not found in fleeting things, but in living a life aligned with God's values and presence. Thus, Solomon's life becomes a testament of wisdom, but also a warning. His achievements and his suffering reveal that, although the world offers countless distractions and promises of fulfillment, the only thing that truly matters is our relationship with the Creator. His final words, "Fear God and keep his commandments," echo as an invitation for all of us to reflect on our own lives and priorities, recognizing that it is in God's presence that we find true purpose and meaning. Solomon's life is rich with teachings and serves as a multifaceted portrait of humanity, with its strengths and weaknesses, moments of glory, and episodes of failure. Examining Solomon's journey offers us deep insights that encourage us to reflect on the importance of maintaining our faithfulness to God, regardless of circumstances, and to consider the true value of wisdom and material accomplishments. The importance of remaining faithful to God through all stages of life. The first major lesson from Solomon's life is the importance of remaining faithful to God at every stage of life. Solomon began his reign with humility and reverence, seeking divine wisdom to lead the people with justice. However, as his life progressed and he accumulated wealth and power, he allowed external influences to draw him away from his initial devotion. His story reminds us that faith and obedience to God should not be occasional practices, but a daily, steadfast commitment. Remaining faithful to God through all stages of life requires spiritual vigilance and a heart focused on eternal values rather than transient ones. Solomon's example warns us about the human tendency to let devotion diminish as achievements grow, often believing that material blessings are a sufficient replacement for spiritual fidelity. His life reinforces the idea that our relationship with God must be the foundation of everything, as He is the one who sustains us, regardless of our position or status. Wisdom and material achievements cannot replace devotion to God. Solomon is often remembered as the wisest man of his time, but his life also teaches that wisdom, valuable as it is not enough to ensure a spiritually healthy and fulfilling life. He possessed wisdom that allowed him to conquer and build a prosperous kingdom, but that wisdom could not prevent his downfall when he lost focus on God. This lesson is particularly relevant in a world that values knowledge and material success as indicators of achievement. In his pursuit of meaning and satisfaction in material accomplishments, Solomon discovered that no earthly good could replace God's presence in his life. Accumulating wealth, power, and even wisdom has limits and cannot fill the spiritual void. As he concluded in Ecclesiastes, without God, everything is vanity, something insubstantial, fleeting, and empty. This lesson from Solomon reminds us that while success and wisdom are valuable, our priority should always be devotion to God, for only in Him can we find enduring purpose. The danger of spiritual deviation and the emptiness of regret. Solomon's life also exemplifies the danger of spiritual deviation. He strayed from God by allowing external influences and political alliances to lead him into idolatry. He engaged in practices that were detestable to God and lost sight of his original mission. His spiritual fall demonstrates that, regardless of one's accomplishments and status, anyone is susceptible to stumbling when they do not guard their faith carefully. Moreover, Solomon experienced the emptiness that comes with drifting away from God. In Ecclesiastes, we see a man who, at the end of his life, reflects on regret and frustration, realizing that he dedicated time and effort to pursuits that, ultimately, brought no peace of mind. This experience serves as a reminder that spiritual deviation not only affects our relationship with God, but also robs us of the joy and fulfillment that a life of obedience and faithfulness provides. The emptiness of regret is a sobering lesson about the need to remain firm in our devotion. Despite his wisdom and success, Solomon could not find satisfaction outside of God and ended up lamenting his choices. His life serves as a powerful warning about the cost of spiritual deviation, reminding us that, without God, even the greatest successes become insignificant and void of true peace. Solomon's journey offers a complete vision of what it means to be human, a being capable of reaching the pinnacle of wisdom, yet also prone to succumbing to the temptations of the world. His life teaches us that material success and human wisdom, while desirable, are fragile and temporary. True wealth lies in a life devoted to God, as only in Him can we find a purpose that transcends circumstances and earthly achievements. Solomon shows us that the path of faithfulness to God is the only one that brings genuine peace and fulfillment. Even for someone with extraordinary gifts, life without God leads to emptiness and regret. His story invites us to reflect on where we place our hearts and on what we are truly seeking in life. Looking at Solomon's life, we are reminded that our devotion to God is a treasure that cannot be replaced, and that, ultimately, this is the true purpose and the greatest achievement we can pursue. Solomon's story is not just an ancient account. It challenges us to examine our own lives and evaluate where we have placed our hearts and our priorities. His errors and regrets remind us that even with all the resources and wisdom, we can stray if we are not firmly rooted in our faith and values. Solomon's life trajectory is a powerful invitation to reflect on the pitfalls that may arise in life and the importance of keeping our relationship with God as our utmost priority. Solomon's life acts as a mirror that reveals our own weaknesses and challenges. He was a man who possessed all that the world values: power, wealth, wisdom, and influence, but found himself dissatisfied and spiritually adrift. His story reminds us that pride, the pursuit of worldly pleasures, and temptations are always around us, and like Solomon, they can lead us away from the path God desires for us. Solomon's experience warns us against seeking fulfillment in external achievements and encourages us to cultivate a life of humility and reliance on God. Today, we live in a world that glorifies material success and constantly pushes us to seek immediate gratification. Society encourages us to accumulate possessions, be admired, and seek recognition, often at the expense of spiritual values and our relationship with God. Like Solomon, we are tempted to look for meaning in worldly accomplishments, but his story reminds us that only God can fill our spiritual void. Reflecting on his life, we are encouraged to assess what truly matters and avoid the pitfalls he encountered. Encouragement to seek wisdom and truth in God. Solomon's story invites us to seek wisdom and truth in God, not in the things of the world. He began his life seeking divine wisdom to rule with justice, but over time, he lost sight of this source of true wisdom. This deviation serves as a caution for all of us. True wisdom comes from God, and only He can guide us to a life of genuine fulfillment. As Solomon discovered too late, success in human wisdom cannot replace communion with God. Let us be encouraged to seek this wisdom from God, which is pure, true, and lasting. May we learn from Solomon's mistakes and nurture a deeper, more faithful relationship with God, putting Him at the center of our lives. Our spiritual journey is supported by divine truth and guidance, and it is only through God that we can attain peace and genuine purpose. Solomon's example calls us to remember that true success is measured by our faithfulness and commitment to eternal values. How can we take a step forward and consider how Solomon's story might impact our own lives? Share in the comments which part of Solomon's life touched you most or made you reflect. Your comment might help others recognize the value of these lessons, and if you believe Solomon's story can impact other lives, share this video. Together, we can spread the message that a truly fulfilled life is one that remains connected to God. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so now to continue receiving content that inspires and supports your spiritual journey. Solomon's life is just one of the many biblical stories with timeless lessons that we explore here. Stay with us, share your experiences, and let's grow together in seeking wisdom and truth in God. Looking at Solomon's life, it becomes clear that the highest calling for each of us is to follow God with all our heart, mind, and soul. Solomon began his journey with sincere devotion and a desire for divine wisdom. But along the way he veered off course. His story shows us that without a firm commitment to God, even the wisest and most prosperous can be lost. The final lesson of his life is both a warning and an invitation for us all, to not let the distractions and temptations of this world pull us away from a relationship with God. The importance of following God with all our heart. Solomon's life reminds us that God desires a genuine relationship with us, a relationship that is not just momentary, but endures through all stages of life. Following God with all our heart means seeking His will and direction above our desires and ambitions. Although Solomon was blessed with wisdom and riches, he drifted from what truly mattered. Let us learn from his mistakes and remain focused on faithfulness to God, knowing that our true purpose lies in living for Him. True purpose and wisdom in God. Solomon discovered that in the end, the true purpose of life is not in possessions, power, or earthly knowledge, but in maintaining a relationship with God. In his final reflections, he left us with advice that resonates through the ages. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. This truth remains unshaken even today. True wisdom and the meaning of life are found in God and our devotion to Him. When we place God at the center of our lives, we find a peace and satisfaction that nothing else can offer. Before we close, we want to express our gratitude to you for joining us on this journey through Solomon's life. We hope these reflections have been inspiring and that Solomon's story has sparked in you the desire to pursue a life of faithfulness and purpose in God. Thank you for being part of this space, for sharing your thoughts, and for accompanying us in the quest for wisdom that transforms lives. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, we invite you to join us. This is a place for learning and reflection, where we explore stories that speak to the heart and bring us closer to God. May Solomon's lessons serve as a constant reminder that with God, we find the true meaning of life. Thank you very much, and see you in the next video.